So let me just start here real briefly. I mean, there's a lot of information already on my YouTube channel, my Facebook, and website if you want to learn more about me. But I'll just, for anyone who's new, just to give a real basic summary about who I am and my background. Brett Stewart, began remote viewing in 2010, and I studied under a number of the personnel that came out of the U.S. military Stargate program, where remote viewing was developed by physicists for these individuals, primarily during the Cold War, to spy on Russians and, well, not just them, on a whole bunch of other people using non-local perception. I really became passionate about it because I saw the immediate and effective way the results. I could look at my work and I could see how accurate it was. And so it kind of kept me motivated to continue learning and progressing. After working for a number of years on it, I began teaching the skill in 2013. And then kind of as I began doing that, I was accumulating a lot of data and a lot of curriculum data. And ultimately that turned into the book I published in 2016, which is Remote Viewing, the Complete Guide. And it's currently available on my website right now in digital format. It's not at the moment available in hard copy, simply because I'm in discussions at the moment with a publisher about possibly getting it published through them. So I don't have it on Amazon at the moment as far as through the self-publishing program. Apparently there's someone who's trying to sell it for $800 because it used to be on there, a hard copy, which I think is kind of interesting, but hey, free market, I guess, right? Someone wants to pay that, but you don't have to if you really want to get it. And I'll talk maybe a little bit more about it at the very end. It is in digital format on my website. I founded Technical Intuition at the end of 2017. Ever since then, so over the past year, I've been featured on a couple different radio shows, John B. Wells program, Fade to Black, Jimmy Church, and I know a number of you guys here tonight heard me and watched me on the Project Camelot show with Carrie Cassidy, which was really a blast. So thank you for showing up here and allowing me to give a presentation on remote viewing and non-local perception. So that's a little bit about me. So from here, I'm going to jump into my introductory lecture. But before I do that, a real brief overview of what I have in store for tonight, an outline, if you will, is I'm going to start with just a real short lecture on perception, some interesting things that you might find fascinating. After that, I'm going to move into the first exercise, which is pretty simple. And then from there, I'm going to talk about remote viewing and some of the more nuanced information about intuition that I've discovered over the years, going through a number of different courses and programs, and then obviously also applying it in my own projects. And then we'll conclude the webinar with the second exercise, which is a basic remote viewing session. I have a target set up for you guys if you haven't done this before. And I'm going to walk you through a very rudimentary remote viewing session, the very first part of it. And then we'll conclude the webinar from there. And so again, if you have any questions, do use the Q&A button on the Zoom feature and leave them for me, and I'll get to those at the very end. Okay, so my lecture tonight, it starts with this concept of the unwelt. And this idea originates back at the beginning of the 20th century. And this was with a German biologist. His name was Uexküll. He's German, so my pronunciation of his name might not be perfect, but Jacob von Uexküll. And he introduced this concept of the unwelt because he wanted to express a really simple but an often overlooked observation, which is that different animals in the same ecosystem, they pick up on different environmental signals. For example, the blind and deaf world of a tick, which is this guy, this pretty guy right up here behind me, that the unwelt for a tick is temperature is a really big aspect of that, as well as odor. It's how it navigates the world. It's the odor of actually butyric acid is how it does this. You have in the middle, you have the black ghost knifefish, and the way that it operates, moves throughout the world is through electrical and the sensing of electrical fields. And then finally, most people are typically familiar with the echolocating bat. And its unwelt, if you will, is air compression waves. And so it senses the movement and the disturbance in the air around it, and is able to detect from insects to predators or friendly or foe. A small subset of the world, the animal world, they're able to detect their own unwelt, but really that's it. The bigger reality, kind of whatever that might mean to them, including us. Uexküll, the German biologist, he referred to that as the Umgebung. Again, pronunciation, please forgive me if you're German. It's the best I can do. but it's the larger reality outside of what our own perception or senses can detect. And interesting thing apart it, though, is each organism that we assume that our detection, that our perceptions, our unwelt, is the entirety of objective reality, that it's all that's out there. And I mean, why would any of us stop to think beyond what could be beyond most of our senses? Most people, it never would have crossed their minds. This is shown really well in the movie The Truman Show, which I'm sure many of you have seen, where Truman lives in a world that's completely constructed around him by a television producer. And at one point in the interview, the producer he's asked by an interviewer, he says, why do you think Truman has never come close to discovering the true nature of the world he's in? And the producer replies, well, we accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. And there's a lot of truth to that. We accept our unwelt and we stop there. And so to really appreciate the amount of information that goes undetected in our human lives, not just in those of these three creatures, is you have to imagine, role play almost a little bit, imagine you're this guy right here, a bloodhound dog. And if you do this, your nose, you'd realize it houses 200 million scent receptors. That's substantially more than what a human has. And on the outside, your nostril, it attracts scent molecules in the way and the size and the way it moves throughout the world. The slits in the corner of each nostril, they flare out. So every time you breathe in through the nose, you're breathing in a whole lot more air than what a human would breathe in. And then even your ears of the bloodhound, as you're running along the ground, they're actually brushing up scent molecules of where you're running over. And so that automatically goes into your sensory smell as well. And so you might, as this bloodhound dog, just thinking in this way, you might be following your master one day and stopping your tracks with the revelation of, what a pitiful human. This impoverished nose that he has, because, what could that silly little human even detect with that little nose full of air? Can he even smell at all, you might ask? And, obviously, we suffer no real great absence from our own perspective of a sense of smell, because we accept the reality that's around us as it's presented to us. And, even without the olfactory capabilities of the bloodhound, its sense of smell, it rarely strikes us as something that, our perception or the world could be different. It's just things are the way they are, and it makes sense to us. We don't need to really pursue anything outside of that. We wouldn't think to, typically. Similarly, until a child learns, for example, that honeybees, that they use ultraviolet signals for communication, or that rattlesnakes employ infrared, it doesn't strike them until they reach, and typically probably forget, that all of this data that's coming in through all these different senses comes through all these different channels that other creatures have that we don't. Or at least we seemingly don't have natural access to these channels. One of the statistics that is fairly well cut that most people don't know is that humans, what we enjoy as far as the electromagnetic spectrum, so light, humans only can detect about 10 trillionths of the electromagnetic spectrum. I mean, that's just minuscule, doesn't even support that concept. 10 trillionths. And so our own awareness, our limitations presented by our own human unwelt, they can be seen also kind of in colorblind people as well. Until they learn that other people can see different hues, it never really is even on their radar screen that there's color in the world around them. They accept it as it is. And the same goes for those that are congenitally blind, or, being sightless for them is not an experience that we might imagine as blackness or a dark hole where vision should be. It's similar to the bloodhound, with its immense sense of smell. A blind person doesn't really miss vision, and it's because they can't even conceive of it. So the electromagnetic radiation completely is not even a part of their reality. As science begins to tap more into these hidden channels, as we see more with quantum mechanics, and we understand more about the nature of reality that we're able to detect with hardware, with devices, the more abundant and clear it becomes that we detect a shockingly small fraction of the reality that's actually around us. And our senses and our ecosystem, they really do not do justice to the larger picture that's there. So wouldn't it be useful then if this concept of the unwelt was maybe more of the part of the public lexicon or vocabulary. And because it's, it's an idea that neatly captures limited knowledge or presently unobtained information, unimagined possibilities. And it's this concept of the unknown unknown, as opposed to, say, the known unknown. You look up in the stars and you see distant planets, and you're like, I wonder if there's life out there. It's a known unknown. Like, we don't know. I mean, for most people, at least, right? They look up at the stars and wonder. But this is something that's actually a step even removed from that. It's an unknown unknown. We don't even know what questions to ask or where to look to see what our unwelt is missing. Wouldn't it be useful if that was kind of part of the normal dialogue? Maybe it would allow people to be a little bit more critical and open-minded as well about what's possible, especially when you start beginning to talk about human consciousness. It was this concept, though, this concept of orders of perception that inspired the physicists in the 1970s and the early 1980s to ponder that, they knew orders of perception could be reduced. They knew through psychological techniques, primarily, a lot of that had been studied in, under controlled laboratory conditions, that orders of perception could be reduced. But they got wondering if the reverse could also be true. If you could also expand them, but expand them not just to say what the average human being has, but to something beyond that. And so that's what ultimately led to their discovery, or it was almost, you would say, a rediscovery of the human capability of non-local perception. But then they took that understanding and that knowledge and they turned that into a teachable skill set, which was remote viewing. And that's been around now for almost 50 years, when it was classified in the military and ultimately was declassified in 95. And then since it was declassified then, it's since continued to evolve as an information gathering skill. And but kind of having an understanding and a background, and I think just a concept of how little do we perceive to begin with once you put your attention on it, just compared to what we know from the bloodhound dog to these other creatures, it is humbling because it also means what could be possible. And I think it's a good place to start when we start thinking about non-local perception and as far as what we can do with it. And it kind of puts us in for me, I'm left kind of in a state of awe with it. It's like, okay, what could be done? Well, let's look and let's keep trying. And one of the ways that we do this or one of the ways we can do this is first we have to become aware of our perceptions. And now most people, they walk around completely oblivious to what's going on. They'll drive down the street, they'll be heading to their job, they'll go to the grocery store, they'll watch a movie, and it's all on autopilot as far as senses are concerned, as far as vision, as far as hearing, as far as the textures, as far as temperatures typically are not as much on autopilot. We're trained at an early age, pay attention to the weather. All the other senses that come in, typically people are on autopilot of those. They don't even realize what they're sensing. There's a quote that I really like by W.B. Yeats that sums it up, which is, and he wrote that the world is full of magical things, patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharper. And I really believe that. I really believe that with the development of consciousness tools, with the development of non-local perception and accessing a deep intuition that we all share, that if we cultivate that, is that it seems magical to us, but it's just waiting there for us to access and to tap into. I really like that quote from him. But learning to access intuition, particularly these structured techniques, one of which I'll talk about at the end of the webinar tonight. In this particular method, it's something that in my own life, I would say expanded. The other viewers have called this a reality box. And so that's what maybe, if you know Ingo Swann's work, one of the father of remote viewing, that's what he called it. Was how wide or how expansive is a reality box. Unwelt is maybe another type of way to look at it. But that by practicing these type of methods, that you suddenly have access to an information-rich reality. And it's almost where time and space become blurred, because you can do event recreation. You can look at things that would otherwise be unknowable, accessing a library of data that was previously decided upon was not possible. And then it obviously becomes a question of, well, what do you want to look at? And so maybe keep it mundane. Maybe you want to look at some more esoteric stuff. But it definitely changed my life. So But the first exercise I want to do tonight, which I think puts a little bit this in perspective and will help individuals. I've done this before with other groups in person, where by going through this exercise, which shows what you have to do is you have to get used to noticing and employing all of your different types of senses. And so this is textures, this is smells, tastes, and dimensions of things. This is noticing the sounds of things. And it's going through these in a systematic, step-by-step way, and then becoming used to doing this and noticing them then. And so this exercise, which I think is very helpful in becoming able in doing that, actually aids the remote viewing process when you just start. Because one of the things that occurs with beginning remote viewers is they try and access this part of their intuition, but they just sit there with a blank, and it's like they don't know, they don't understand how to listen. You know, if you've listened to, I can't remember which interview it was on, but it was one of the radio interviews. I just did a little thought experiment, which is where you ask the other individual, what is going to be, you don't preface it with anything, but you just say, what's going to be your next thought? And typically this catches the other person off guard, because no one is typically thinking about what their next thought or even what thoughts are. They're just thinking about what they have to do the day. So the standard response is usually what, or asking for it's confusion or asking for clarification. But the reality of it, the situation is that was the next thought. The next thought was spontaneous. It spontaneously arose, and they didn't need to grab their library card, stroll down there, go to the correct aisle in the library of next thoughts, grab it, and then come back and report to me, right? It just automatically happened. But how did they do that? How does that work? How does this spontaneous accessing of real-time data occur that we don't even think about? And once we take a closer look at that, and we're able to not only understand that mechanism, but we can actually take control of it and use it in the manner that can be used for non-local perception. And it's this spontaneity, that when cultivated, that can act as a gateway for, if you will, metaphorical high-speed information downloads. And while it's not the topic of conversation for this webinar, this highway, if you will, of kind of understanding where the gateway is, and then that super highway of information that can travel back and forth, is that it's not a one-way street. Now, when you're beginning, when you're trying to understand and learn these principles, you kind of have to start at the basics, right? Start at the beginning. It's usually a wise idea. There's more you can do than just download information patterns, is that you can actually upload them and inform this library, if you will, as well. And the first step of that is informing the part of you that actually accesses it, which is your unconscious self, which is an incredibly valuable thing. And this will probably be, I don't know if it'll be a webinar topic of discussion, but it'll definitely be the topic of a discussion for a future class that I'll be doing really a deep dive and an in-depth review of everything I've learned, how I apply to my life, and the type of real-world applications you can use by informing as opposed to just downloading once you've developed this type of superhighway of information, this communication connection. But start at the beginning. Unless you can access information patterns, you'll probably be fairly hopeless in uploading them and all that entails. So the first exercise, though, is, let me go to the next. It's going to begin with spontaneous visualization, because perceptions all have to do, especially when it comes to non-local perception and intuition, it all has to do with spontaneous percepts. This exercise is designed in a way for you to become familiar and ease yourself into being able to access those regularly. And it's not a very hard thing to do, but most people say, I can't do that. I don't have no inner sight, or I can't think in that manner. But once someone typically kind of guides them through that process, they realize the immense creative potential that they have. And then once they become aware of specific percepts and aware of specific avenues that this comes in, that you actually create a very high fidelity and a very rich experience. But the easiest way to do this, to begin with this, is by creating vivid imaginary experience. Before we get started on this exercise, it really shouldn't take too terribly long. Just do know that, this is completely safe. This is just an imaginary experience. There's no ulterior motive here or anything like that. And if you want to participate, please do. I encourage it because I think it's a fascinating little thing to do. But we're just using our imagination here just to get used to sensing what we sense and then perceiving what we perceive. But it's just really like an imaginary experience that we're creating here. So to begin, is if you have a pen or a piece of paper, if you'd been taking notes or something like that, go ahead and put those down. You won't need those. The second thing you'll want to do is relax, because if your mind is elsewhere, this is a big part of accessing intuition. If your mind is elsewhere and distracted and you have all this mental noise going on, then it's going to be a lot more difficult to focus on the task at hand. Now, obviously, someone guiding you through work, you're able to focus on them guiding you, so it's a lot easier than if you were just to sit down and try and access your own by yourself. But sit back, take a deep breath, put down any pen or paper that you have, and then when you're ready, go ahead and close your eyes, and I'll begin basically just this imaginary guided experience. And the reason we close our eyes, you never would do this in a remote viewing session, ever, because it evokes imagination, which is not what we want to. We mean, if we're using remote viewing to access non-local information, we don't want our creative imagination to be opening the door and helping out, because then we're going to get a tall tale, aren't we? But for this exercise, we're going to be relying on our imagination, because we're going to be using it to show us how accessing different avenues of perception can create a very vivid detail and account of something that we otherwise probably wouldn't be able to recreate. So we close our eyes simply in this particular exercise because all the light information, millions of bits that are coming through, will distract you from the process. So this should only take a couple minutes, though. Okay, so close your eyes and we'll begin. So the first thing I want you to do is, in your imagination, in your mind's eye, is I want you to remember the face of someone that you like thinking about. And imagine that their face is right in front of you, perhaps 5 to 6 feet in front of you. And as you see their face there, remember what the rest of their body looks like. And imagine that they are standing right there in front of you, their whole body. And ask yourself these questions as you see them there. What are they wearing? And just notice what you notice. Just perceive what you perceive. Are they saying something to you? Are they reaching out and waving to you, perhaps? Do you want to say hi to them? It's fine. Now imagine behind them is a very tall tree. It's a very strong tree. This could be a redwood or an oak. But whatever type of tree it is, it's very strong and it's very tall. And it has very large branches that come out from the main root of the tree. And now I want you to imagine that the person that was standing in front of you is now sitting very comfortably and very safely on the lowest branch that will safely carry them. And you can just see them there. Maybe they're swinging their feet back and forth. Maybe notice their emotional state. Are they smiling at you? Maybe they're happy to have the elevated viewpoint. Next, imagine that your person is in a new place on the tree, standing very comfortably and very safely, all the way at the very top of this tall tree. And use your imagination to make sure they are comfortable in whatever way you want. Maybe there's a lounge chair up there, or I don't know, there's a hot tub. It's your imagination. Whatever would make them comfortable, put that up there with them, balanced perfectly at the top of this tree. Next, imagine that the person is standing on one leg at the top of this tree. And again, do whatever is necessary to make sure that they're safe and they're comfortable doing that. And notice that they're standing on one leg with the other one lifted up behind them. And on that one that leg that's lifted up, they're balancing 3 colored rings. They're twirling these hoops like a circus performer. So an immense balancing act that's going on in your imagination. And as you notice them, notice the movement that is going on by this person at the top of the tree. Notice what colors are those 3 rings that are being balanced. How about the texture of the air moving as the balancing act is going on? Can you feel that as the air moves? Is it colder at the top of the tree? What type of temperatures exist up there? Maybe it's a hot day. Finally, smell what you can smell. What type of fragrance exists at the top of the tree? Maybe it's the oak. Maybe you're near the sea and you can smell the salt water. But just notice what you smell when you put your attention on that. Now I want you to imagine that the person that's standing on the top of the tree is holding a small flag in one hand. And I want you to observe and become aware of the colors and size of this flag that they're holding. And observe the dimensions of the flag. There's probably a pattern on it. What is the pattern of the flag? Notice how the flag moves in the wind, if there is any. Can you see it? And see if you can recognize what the flag represents, if anything. Now imagine that there are 2 owls, kind of like in those old Disney cartoons, and they're flying up, and between them, they're holding a banner. They're holding it in their beaks, and they're flying all the way up to where the person at the top of the tree is standing. And imagine that the banner has a message just for you. And so you can read it or become aware of what that message is. What the words say. And next imagine a little bird. It also is flying up, and it's going to land very, very gently on the top of the person's head that's standing on the top of the tree. And it's just going to sit there, and it's going to start singing a little song. And so become aware of the song, the melody. Do you recognize it? Now imagine that the person very safely and very comfortably and very enjoyably comes down from their perch at the top of the tree. And they do this in a way, again, it's very safely, very comfortably, and very enjoyably, and in any way that you want them to come down. Or perhaps you leave it up to them. You leave it up to them on how they want to come down from the tree. And just imagine them moving down in any way that you want. So they end up right where they started, 5 or 6 feet in front of you. And imagine asking them how they like the ride. You know, if it's appropriate, give them a hug, wave to them, whatever. And finally, imagine them surrounded by a ball of white light. And in this ball, they're going to be carried back whence they came in the ball light in a way that's in the highest good for them and all concerned. And open your eyes. So this method or process, it introduces this concept of, with very familiar things, tree, a person you know, 2 owls perhaps from a Disney cartoon, that an unfamiliar whole comes out on the other side. You created that, and then you're able to obtain this is more of an experience. So taking this type of way all the way to the practical application of these types of tools of inner sight and inner visualization begins, is more in the area of what's referred to as extended remote viewing. It's having the experience of a non-local sight. But this is very much a first step in how you would start accessing that. But I also believe it's a really good first step in accessing and understanding on how we want to obtain high fidelity information, even when using structured remote viewing techniques, which is what I'll talk about later in this evening, after I go over a couple things on perception. But, if I had just asked anyone in the webinar here to do that entire experience, just from beginning to end, the entire process, they probably would have had a pretty difficult time doing that. But it was because it was the step-by-step nature of the process, of the guided visualization and the imagination, that likely for most of you produced a fairly high fidelity experience. But the way it was done is that it focused on specific key words or key things that bring the fidelity about. But in the chat, I'm just curious if anyone is interested in sharing. One of the things that I just like kind of just hearing it from people who ever do this exercise is, how did the person come down from the top of the tree if you ended up doing the exercise? I'd be curious if you put that in the chat, and just to see the imagination that a lot of people have is always pretty interesting. So if you want to share that, I'd love to see it. But I think the first time I did it, I had the person at the top of the tree. They bounced up and down on the tree, and it became like a spring, and then they launched themselves like 100 feet up, and I doing a whole bunch of spins, and then they landed. They did the superhero landing on the ground. And so what do we have? We have floated like Mary Poppins, climbed down, just materialized. The staircase of branches. Interesting. Haven't heard that one before. Floated, ditto on Poppins. Interesting. So 2 people had that one. Lowered by a rope, like a professional driver. Oh, interesting. Flew down. So yeah. So there's so many different ways. Like everybody has this ability to access their inner sight and utilize that in a way that, in this case, it was just imagination. It was a friendly and it's a very, safe way to kind of experience what we experience. But I think it's important, because what I had you do is I had you go through all your different types of perceptions. I had you go through the textures. I had you go through the colors that were there, the smells, the tastes, the temperatures, the sounds, as well as dimensions and motions and all these different things. And then when you put your attention, you focus it very cleanly and clearly on that experience, the fidelity, how vivid the imagination experience becomes, it rises far, far higher than if I just said, okay, I want you to create an imagining experience where a friend is on top of a tree and, tell me what comes up. You might have 1 or 2 things and that's it. And compare that to the vivid experience you just went through if you did the walkthrough. And so this is the manner, this is the beginning of how, by cultivating those avenues of perception. And there's other stuff to it as well, it's more advanced, but the beginning is when you begin to cultivate those and put your attention on those things. That's how you can then begin to control them, and you can begin to focus them and redirect them towards non-local perception and gaining information about things that aren't in the room with you, or happened yesterday, or 100 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or may potentially happen in the future. But it all starts about gaining control and becoming the observer. And so this has to do with paths of perception. And so in this next slide, these are the various paths of perception that human beings have. And the very first one, there's 3 different key primary paths. Now there's maybe a couple that aren't on this wheel, but these are the dominant ones that humans are capable of. And the interesting thing is that most people are only dominant in one of these categories. It's very rare that someone is well balanced unless they've taken training, or they've done certain types of practices that require them to build upon their ability to develop these other perceptual paths. And what I mean by this is, the way that you can actually tell this is people tend to clearly reveal their dominant perceptual modality in the way they described verbally the world in communication. So, for example, the visually dominant person, if you talk to them when they're recreating an experience or talking about what happened to them in the day, they might say something like, "That's clear," or "I can see that," or "looks good." And, these are statements that clear is uniquely visual, or see, again, uniquely visual, looks uniquely visual. Then you have someone who may be auditory dominant. And so they communicate and express their experiences about their life in the world through they interpret sound and music and words. And so they might say something like, "Sounds good," or "I hear what you're saying," or "Tell me about that." And then the final path, if you will, is the kinesthetic. And kinesthetic is movement, it's touch, temperature, it's pressure and feelings. And not emotional, but like physical, the force of something being pushed. And the way that they might express or describe something that occurred to them in the day is they might say, this is the common, "That hits the nail on the head," it's the physicality of it, or "You're pretty sharp," or "I get your point," again, the point. Once you're aware of these perceptual avenues, though, is that you can then fine-tune them. And that's exactly what the methodology, the structured skill set of remote viewing does, is it uses the understanding of how thoughts arise in the mind. And then it also then combines that with the different paths of perception, and it marries those two together, and then it focuses them like very keenly on a task at hand, which is accessing information from the intuitive self. But most people, they're on autopilot. They're getting their groceries, they're going to their movie. From auditory to visual to kinesthetic, they're either very dominant in one, the other ones are lost, or they're not even, they wouldn't even perceive those. They're not even aware of them. And so there's a couple exercises that I personally do that we don't have time for in this webinar, obviously, but there's a lot you can do to develop this. First is that you can determine whether or not you're lacking in one of the other categories of perception. You find out what you're dominant in, and then there's different techniques you can employ to actually strengthen the other ones that you are lacking in. And so doing that tends to really be helpful for when you're using non-local perception or intuitive techniques. Right. Okay, so the next thing I want to get into, because this is kind of the follow-in to remote viewing, and then the exercise we're going to do, the remote viewing exercise, is that we talked about the paths of perception, but even in the perception, when you marry those together, is that there's actually different types of intuition as well. It's not just one thing, is that you can break it down very succinctly at the same time. And so this particular model is taken from the HeartMath Institute, and this comes from their Resilience Advantage program, if anyone is aware of that. But I believe that it's, HeartMath, I really have a lot of respect for, and I believe that their models and their programs are really valuable. It's not remote viewing or anything like that, but they typically deal with how to deal with stressful situations or a stressful work environment. And they take science and a lot of peer-reviewed studies on how to use consciousness and use intuition. It's the kind of thing where a lot of people don't want to say the word intuition, or they want to say remote viewing because it's not as digestible by a larger audience that doesn't believe in consciousness to begin with. But some of their work I found very helpful in understanding what's going on with these scientific models. And so I was fortunate to be able to attend one of their workshops a number of years ago. And these are usually reserved for the police departments or hospitals and physicians, large organizations where stress is a really key thing. And so they teach primarily how to deal with stress. But they had a model on intuition. So I want to share that model with you guys in the webinar. So the first aspect of intuition is what is known as implicit knowledge. And implicit knowledge is something that refers to learning. It's when we say forgot something, we learned something and we forgot how to do it. But it doesn't mean that it's gone. It means that we may not have conscious access to doing it, but that memory is still going to be buried deep within our unconscious. And so sometimes maybe you forgot how to do something, but you intuited it and you just did it. Like, wow, I didn't realize I could do that well. But maybe like 25 years ago, you had done something that, and then you read a book about it, or you'd written, you written a paper about it at the university or something like that. So that would be, say, forgotten knowledge, but it's primarily subconscious knowledge that we gain through experience as well. And so just by doing things, your unconscious does a learning on its own as well. And so you may intuit how something, you're really good at solving puzzles. And by doing lots of different puzzles, suddenly you look at this new kind of puzzle that no one's able to figure out. And because subconscious has gotten so good at doing one type, it's able to fit that understanding, that implicit knowledge into this new task. And suddenly you may be really good at doing the jigsaw puzzle or some other kind of thing. So that's the first kind of intuition, is implicit. The second in this model is energetic. And it's called energetic sensitivity. And this is our ability to sense environmental signals. So these can be sometimes magnetic fields. This is where it comes from. If you've ever been driving in your car or at a coffee shop or something like that, and someone is staring you down from behind you, your hair on the back of your neck sticks up, and you turn around and there they are. The other person looks away, right? It's like, how did you know that? There's some sort of, for lack of a better word, probably not something that we could detect. Well, heart math would probably tell you they could detect it. But they believe it's an electromagnetic or an energetic thing that is occurring, that's going on there, that you sense. And another thing that some people here may have had the experience with, I certainly have, where perhaps you may have gone into a room, you've gotten home, and you walk into the house or into the apartment or wherever you're at, and there's no one there, but 30 or 25 minutes ago, say there was a really bad argument between your roommates or between your siblings, and this is before you even see them. So you're walking into a doorway or into an environment or into a house, and you can just feel the heaviness the anger in the environment without even seeing any type of facial expression, like not even seeing the people. You just sense it. It's like it's palpable in the air. And that would be another type of energetic sensitivity, where someone, this is where a lot of naturally gifted intuitives get very refined energetic sensitivities, and they can use that by going in different places to sensing kind of what's there, the energetics of a space, kind of what's happened historically. But you don't have to be a ghost detective to use this kind of practically, to kind of understand and for it to inform you about what's happened in your environment that you otherwise would not have been able to detect through, objective means, right? Talking to them after the fact, or seeing a facial expression, or, noticing that there's a crashed vase on the ground. Maybe there's an argument, right? It's like all that notwithstanding, people still have the ability to detect that. So that's the second type of intuition. And now the third type is where remote viewing lies. And this is what was called non-local intuition. So for example, this is when a mother senses that her child is in distress or has been injured while their child is on the other side of the world. Something that no way you could have known, no way that mother could have known. They knew something was wrong. They knew there was an accident that happened, and then they called and they find out that it was true, that was verified, and that motherly intuition, for example, was correct. And it's not just mothers and children. This happens between twins. This happens to people typically in the everyday, where you'll start thinking about a friend and then 5 seconds later they'll call. And that'll happen many times. Not just, if it was one time, okay, but it happens maybe many times over a course of a month, maybe even the same person. And so it's like there's a communication, there's an information that's being accessed non-locally because the person's not in the room with you. You have no other stimuli that were supposed perception that objective scientists would tell you that is possible, but you're seemingly knowing ahead of time. And these are the subjective experiences you're having. But these are the main primary types of intuition. So when we're talking about remote viewing, or kind of what I do and what I teach, it is within the realm of non-local. That's what I'm really interested in, because that's the part that really fascinates me the most. Not that the other two aren't good. I mean, implicit knowledge you kind of have regardless. Energetic sensing or sensitivity is certainly something you can develop and work on. A lot of people are naturally gifted in that department. It's not something I teach, but it's interesting nonetheless. But non-local intuition is where remote viewing and what I do, it's where it falls in the type of intuition. Moving on to the next slide. If you're new and you're like, well, Brett's saying remote viewing a lot. What is this remote viewing thing? Well, let's start with just a really simple definition of what it is. I mean, maybe you've heard about it before. The term has kind of been hijacked, I feel, by a lot of different groups. Everyone's apparently a remote viewer these days, but it actually means a very specific thing. You can be intuitive, but just because you're intuitive or you're able to access intuition and non-local perception does not mean you're a remote viewer, because remote viewing is a very specific thing. But the underlying example of what remote viewing is in the description, what I have up on the screen is it's the acquisition and description by mental means of information blocked from ordinary perception by distance, shielding, or time. So it's information you couldn't otherwise have known. And remote viewing is applying a structured technique to that. But not, I won't say always. Sometimes there's more freeform versions of remote viewing that can work, but for intents and purposes of this webinar and kind of what I teach, remote viewing is very much a structured technique. So there's like a process, a step-by-step you go through. But in order to utilize, let's say, this tool against real-world problem sets, the thing about remote viewing is that, like learning to play the piano or an instrument or anything else, is that you have to actually practice the skill. And so to do the level of work, if you watched a couple of the remote viewing project webinars that I've done on Red Dog or on Moksha, or I have a number of, the next video I plan on doing is going to be on the information that came back from Antarctica when we looked at that. That took a lot of practicing to get there. I mean, to get to the level to be able to work at an operational level. Beginners don't start there. It would be a little bit foolhardy to start there. Where beginners start is with readily verifiable targets. And so this is typically famous landmarks. This is people or events, and there's usually a photograph in some form that after they're finished with the session, they can match it up side by side and say, okay, how close was I? Okay, maybe 80% of my data was off. 20%, I can make sense, it fits. And then through the practice, they slowly actually start to increase. They get rid of mental noise. They overcome a lot of the hurdles that are part of that learning process. And then that accuracy level gets higher and higher and higher and higher until they're able to actually do one-to-one representations of the photograph without even seeing or knowing what it could be. Any photograph in the entire world, and they can get a pretty good description of what's going to be in that photograph. And so that's that's considered the feedback process. And that through that constant feedback, visual and immediate feedback process, it allows the viewer to increase their skill set. And this can be used against, once they reach that, it can be used against a number of real-world problem sets. For example, determining optimum personal life trajectories. You can use it for things like that. So maybe that could be investments or health. You can use it to answer personal questions that you might have, to even technical engineering problems, missing objects, market trends, looking at historical events. That's something I really enjoy doing, is event recreation of historical events. So, for example, a primary construction method of the Great Pyramid of Giza. There's a lot of floating rocks. I'll tell you that. But it's very interesting. But you can do a lot of reconstruction type of events, historical, which is really cool thing you can do with remote viewing. But you can also explore unreachable destinations in real time. So what's going on somewhere across the ocean? Let's describe what's going on there now. To also even looking into scientific mysteries, enigmas, and even debunking theories. We live in an online world where so much information is just fake news. I don't just mean from mainstream media. I also mean from a lot of other sources, typically on social media. And just to give an example of that was applied in remote viewing, and one that I was a part of was, and I'll probably re-release this project data in the future. I'd like to, again, because I think it's a great case study for it. But the concept of the Black Knight satellite is very popular in different conspiracy circles, that there's this satellite that's been orbiting the planet all this time for thousands of years. It's keeping track on us. And there's a photograph that was released by NASA of some weird thing in space that all of these individuals said, aha, this is the proof that the Black Knight satellite exists. Now, I'm not here to say something like that satellite doesn't exist, But we took that photograph and we looked at it, and we ran a full gamut of remote viewing techniques to describe what it is, where it came from, what was the purpose of this object, how did it function, who made it, and all these different angles. And what came back is that it was a plastic sheet that was in space that had come off, and it was debris, essentially nothing more. And a little bit more digging, you can actually find a one-to-one representation of that actual, it's a thermal blanket, actually, to be precise. You can find the shape of that thermal blanket in the original assembly of what it came off on when it was on the ground and it was put together by NASA. So, you can use remote viewing to that end as well to say, okay, is this real? Look at it. And if it's not, you're going to get a very clear answer back once you've reached kind of a high caliber of using the skill. So there's a lot of different things you can use this for. A lot of practical applications. But you want to look at the more esoteric stuff too. That's obviously available once you reach a high level, high proficiency level. But, in the hands of ethical and responsible individuals, and when you combine it and when there's an alliance between, say, cutting edge science and technology, this is maybe more of a personal belief, but I really believe that non-local perceptual faculties like remote viewing, that the implications are so enormous that it could really, if there's enough people that are practicing it, there's enough people that are putting it into effect in our society, that I think we could create a really bright future once we start unlocking these abilities and we start teaching everyone that they have them. So it's a big part of why, even I'm putting on this webinar for free. Because I believe that when there's more awareness to this, and I put the time in to create the webinar, that it can have I hope that it can have a positive effect, and that's useful. But it's enough talking about what can be done. Why don't we give it a try? So I'm sure there's a couple fairly advanced remote viewers here. You've obviously seen what I'm about to go over here. This is a very, very basic introduction to getting started, kind of get your feet wet with remote viewing. And for this exercise, if you'd like to join me, you'll need a pen. Please use a pen. Don't use a pencil if at all possible. There's a number of reasons. And then also one piece of paper is all you'll need for this exercise. So as you have those, you can go gather them, or if you have them in front of you now, that's great. I'm going to do two things first before we jump into the exercise. First, I'm going to give the outline, and then I'm going to give you an example of what I'm going to have you do. So you have two different ways, so you won't feel lost. That's one of the things that in a lot of the workshops and other webinars and other even classes that don't even teach the same technique that I teach, beginners often feel very confused by what they're even supposed to do, because you immediately say, just jump in and just go. And so it's why even doing the visualization exercise, I think, is a good way to get used to, okay, let's sense our perceptions and focus and talk about those. But then also it's, okay, how does this process work? Let's go through it step by step so there's no confusions on what you're supposed to do. The very first step in this process for this exercise is to kinesthetically connect to the target. And when I say target, all I mean is that I've picked a photograph. I put some numbers on that photograph, and I'm going to give you those numbers. And your goal is you're going to be describing what the photograph is without knowing what it is. It's considered, we call it blind. It's working blind with remote viewing. Before you can even get to describing through your your spontaneous perceptions and even drawing what this thing is, you have to, if you will, handshake with the site. Shake hands with it. You meet someone in person, you greet them. So it's almost like step one is you have to greet the pattern of information, or you have to go to the right aisle in the library. And the way you do that is through a kinesthetic connection. Now, the second step that we do, and I'll give you an example of that after this. The second step is we catch and record our senses. And so we proceed through a series of categories, beginning with textures, moving on to colors, then smells, and then tastes. And I'll be guiding you through this. So there's no memorization that needs to go on here. You just listen to the guided remote viewing, basic remote viewing exercise, and you'll be fine. But you're going to notice what you notice and what arises spontaneously and simply record it. That's your job in step number 2. Proceed through sensory categories and write down your spontaneous impressions. And the final step is to sketch. And you're going to draw basic shapes that you intuit best represent the site. And so this is certainly not a Picasso. This is not a detailed rendition. This is very, very basic geometric shapes. We call them archetypes in remote viewing, of what you feel best represents whatever it is that exists in this photograph that I'll show you afterwards as feedback that's connected with these numbers that I'm going to give you. And you just go with whatever is spontaneous, whatever comes to mind first. You intuit it, and then you don't question it. You just go with it. You just write it down, and you keep it. If you keep it light, if you keep it less stressful, and you just go with whatever comes, that's the most that you can really ask yourself to do. And from there, some people pick it up a lot more quickly. Some people it takes a little bit more time. But, the process is really a tried and true process that as long as you stick to the structure, and especially if you ever decide to end up practicing this and to try and use this and, get to a level of accuracy, repeated practice is really, really key, as well as getting feedback. And, for me, a big part of it was getting constructive criticism. The final note that I do just want to mention is that this exercise, again, it's a basic one. It's pretty simple, but it's also only the very first part of a full remote viewing session. Those, like the advanced viewers here, know a full remote viewing session can go on anywhere between 30 to 45 minutes, depending on how fast you are. And so we're going to do this. It's probably going to take about 1 or 2 to 3 minutes, I think, probably. So we're just doing the very first part of the full exploration of remote viewing session. But the way that remote viewing works is it's a repeat process. And there's some caveats to this, and there's more details obviously to it, but the structure stays the same. And you go through the stages again and then again and again to get higher and higher fidelity or higher and higher accuracy about maybe what's over here at the site. And then maybe you look over here, what's at the site, and then you describe that. And so there's repeat, we call them explorations. And so once you have an understanding of these basic first 3 steps, you're well on your way to understanding the rest of the process, and then ultimately using it against beginning to attempt to describe blind photographs. So as the example before we start, though, I do want to show you, oh, wow, I just turned white. So I just wanted to give you an example of what it actually looks like of what you're going to be producing here tonight. So this is the example exercise. I'm going to give you the numbers. It's just 8 numbers, and you just would write them like so on the paper. But you're going to do this step 3 times. You're going to write the numbers out, and then directly next to the numbers, you're just going to produce a very, very quick line squiggle on the page. This is the handshake, because this is the kinesthetic process. So think of it, this is you're walking up to this, whatever information is associated with the number. That's not the number, by the way, that I'll be giving you. But this is you shaking hands with that information pattern. And so when we do this 3 times, you really want to make sure, okay, we're here, hello. And so we repeat the process in case we mess it up the first or second time. That's the only reason you do it 3 times. But it's kinesthetic also because it's our arm producing the movement on the page as well. And there's a lot more theory behind this, and what this is called. But for our intents and purposes for this evening, it's our handshake. It's our connection to whatever the photograph is. Second step, again, I'll be guiding you through this, is just down the bottom. And you can make 2 columns if you need, if you get more descriptors. But I'm going to be guiding you through these categories of different types of perceptions. So I'm going to start with textures. I'm going to go into smells. I'm then going to go into, colors, and then in smells, and so on and so forth. And I'm going to ask you to write down what spontaneously arises in your prefrontal cortex, in your mind. And this is where the thought-catching idea comes in. Because what your goal here is you're there and you have your pen on the page, and it's almost like you're going to be listening. You're going to be waiting for whatever thought comes in when I ask you, okay, give me the textures that pop up spontaneously within your consciousness. And you sit there and you listen. And you say, well, I hear bumpy, or I hear hard, I hear smooth. And you just write them. All you're doing is you're catching those thoughts that are arising spontaneously, and you're writing them down. That's all you're doing. And so I'll be guiding you through it, though, so don't worry. Don't be too stressed out about it. But we go through these categories. We'll get to the end, and now we'll be going through the different sensory categories, the step 2. The final aspect of just this beginning basic remote viewing exercise is then to draw what you intuitively, the shapes that are associated with whatever is at the site. And again, you're not thinking, you're not using analysis here, because how could your thinking mind even know what the photograph is? It really couldn't. I mean, unless I show you the picture or have doing some other kind of trickery here, which I'm not, you wouldn't be able to know, your conscious mind. And so it's almost like anything that your imagination conceives of. Oh, I think that Brett is probably going to do this target because he's crafty. Well, you see, you're engaging the wrong part of your mind, because you're not supposed to be engaging your imagination. You're supposed to be sitting there listening. You're supposed to be sitting there and, okay, what does my intuition just say it is? And you can feel it out on the page. Maybe you feel it out kinesthetically, which shape you want to draw. Maybe there's a couple of them. Maybe there's only one. Maybe there's even more detail at this point for you. But, let your intuition guide you, and then just follow it, and see what comes. And if nothing comes, that's fine too. But, just be open to it. And that's really the first step, is you have to be open to the experience for the experience even to occur in the first place. And so that is the exercise we're going to do. Now, before we start, this is an opportunity in the chat, is that if anybody has a question about this exercise, let me know now. Maybe I can answer a couple of those before we start. Again, it's pretty basic. You lot are probably a pretty intelligent bunch. But if you do have a question about any of the steps, let me know. Otherwise, we'll get started here. Next slide. Okay, so before we begin, similar to the previous exercise, it's really important. There's a lot of stuff that I actually do that I've discovered is helpful for full remote viewing sessions. But for now, just like the previous exercise, take a deep breath, relax. It's good to just, let go, have a little fun with it. This isn't that serious, right? It's just it's a simple exercise. Whether you hit the target or not is not a huge deal. But let yourself be open to it, and then just, relax a little bit, and then you should be fine. And then follow, I'm going to guide you through the whole process so you won't be lost. So to begin, the number is on your screen, and you're going to begin with step 1. And so whenever you're ready, go ahead and write that number out on the page at the very top. And as soon as you finish writing the last number, as soon as you do that, directly to the right of it, immediately create a very fast line squiggle. This should be 0.5 to 1 second long. Very, very quick. So go ahead and start now. Do the first one. And you should do this 3 times total. Now that we've shaken hands with the site, let's start beginning with textures. In the column, spontaneously start writing down any texture that pops into your mind. So is it smooth or bumpy? Is it hard or soft? Wet or slippery? Is it dry or rough? Or anything else? Move on to colors next. Even if you have more, you still want to move on. What colors exist at the site? And this one should be a little bit easier. Any color that pops into your mind spontaneously, write it down. Are there any patterns at the site? Or just solid colors? Is anything transparent? Move on to the next category, which is smells. Write down any smells that arise in your spontaneous perception. Is it fragrant and aromatic? Or is it more musty and pungent? Is it a stale smell or a sweet smell? Maybe none of the above. Just write them down as they come in. See how many you can get. Move on to tastes now. What tastes exist at the site? Spontaneously, write them down. Is it bitter and tart? Maybe it's fresh. Any type of taste. Move on to temperatures now. If you were there, is it hot or cold? Is it humid or arid? Is it frigid or ambient? Maybe it's none. Maybe it's something else. Just write down whatever occurs to you spontaneously. Next, move on to sounds. Is this a loud environment or is it quiet? Do you hear buzzing or chirping? Is there something mechanical or metallic? Maybe it's none of those. Maybe there's another sound. Whatever sound just arises spontaneously, the idea of it, maybe you even hear it, just write it down. Finally, you're going to be noticing dimensions that come in spontaneously. So I want you to write down dimensionality of the place. Is this high place and tall? Or is it more of a short and stout? Is it huge, medium, or tiny? Is it open and vast, or is it more of a closed environment? What about motion? Is there any motion there? Or is it still? To conclude this section, I want you to place yourself there. If you were there, ask yourself this question. You can almost sub-vocalize it. If I was there, how would I emotionally feel about the site? And in one word, describe this. And write that down. Are you awed by the site? Do you feel in your emotional core bored, relaxed, tense? Maybe you're happy, fearful. Maybe something else. But just write that down. So finally, now move on to the third step, where you're going to draw and intuit the basic shapes and outlines of the most significant archetypes at the site. And so put your pen on the page, and whatever shape you feel belongs, that's associated with this site, just draw it out. Don't doodle, be precise as you can. And once you're finished drawing, put the pen down. I'll give you a few more seconds to finish that up. Okay, so everyone should be concluded. Good job. If this was your first remote viewing session, fantastic. Congratulations. But this is how you gain entry into the library, is you start very, very basic. You start with handshaking with the information. You start with perceiving what you can perceive to bring fidelity up. If there's little knobs on fidelity of your perceptions, going through those stages slowly starts increasing each one of those knobs on the textures of the environment, the sounds that are there, the colors, and all those different things. And obviously, optimally, you'd be want to doing these spontaneously without me talking to you, telling you how to do it, because even me doing that is, in a way, probably a distraction. It certainly is. But it's a way of learning it to kind of get an understanding of how to do it, which is the important part here. So I think before I give feedback in the chat, does anyone want to, take a look at your work? And if anyone wants to wager or take a stab at just their general feeling of what the site is that we're talking about here, I'd be interested in seeing in the chat. This is the who wants to take a stab. Who has it's okay to be wrong. I've had so many wrong sessions in my career when I was learning. Like it's actually okay. But if you have a description, or if you'd like a general consensus of what the site is, I'd be eager to see it. A good thing, how about, is it large or is it really tiny? Let's see if we can seek a consensus on some of these things, on some of the basics. Is this like really, really big, whatever is here, or are we like really, really tiny? What do most people have? We have vast, we have huge, large, we have medium. Okay. Blue sky, evergreen trees. Interesting, Mike. Sandy. Okay. Yeah, what kind of textures do you guys have here? So we got a couple of things that are pretty large. Okay. We have the sandy from Catherine. Hard textures, rough textures, the tree texture. Sandy, rough, earthy, gritty. Okay. Light colored, sandy, earthy. Oh, a lot of gravel, sandy, earthy. Okay. What about dry, rough, sloping? Interesting. Firm, dry, hard. Good. Okay, what about colors? What type of colors did you guys get? Just the general colors when you're writing them down. Blue from Irwin. Okay, just blue at the site. Red, green, orange and white, tan. We had blue, green, white, red, orange, cement green. Okay, so a lot of green, a lot of blue, a couple oranges. Okay, so colors are a little bit wider spread on the colors. What about the sounds? Did you guys pick up any interesting sounds at the site? Maybe that just dawned on you, that came in by themselves spontaneously? Breeze, crackling, chirping of birds, ding, birds. A lot of people have birds. Okay. Water flowing, water sounds, dangling. Okay. Whizzing, whirling. Okay. And then humid, large, stone. Okay. Muffled, but not mechanical. Okay. Okay, interesting. Okay, well, looking at similarities, just very, very basic of what you guys wrote in the chat, is that the big one is, a lot of you guys said this is really large. A lot of you guys, I'm talking about the ones that are like, a lot of people picked up on. You had the sandy, the rough, the earthy. For textures. Size, you have really large. Did you guys get any specific shapes when you look at your drawings? Did any of you guys, now again, these are supposed to be really basic drawings, archetypes. These are not detailed sketches, but did anyone get a drawing of something that they think of like what's similar to? Rocky Mountains, we have slope of a mountain, a peak. Okay, we have a lot of peaks. We have triangles. It's like a cabin on the mountains. Someone has waves. Again, we have peak. Okay. Okay. I think a couple people had the busy, of the street. But a lot of peaks. A lot of peaks. A lot of mountains. Okay. Sloped steps. Interesting. Triangles. Yeah. Triangles typically like a peak or something like that. Okay. Interesting. And so a couple of people had 5 peaks. Interesting, Jacob. Interesting. So, okay, good job. Very interesting. And, for those, I'm going to give you the feedback here in just a second. But, just from, I don't have to, you can make your own assessment just on, again, this is a very basic remote viewing session. But just there's quite a bit of commonality between a number of the people who shared their information. Some people, there's always going to be people who got something a little bit different, which is perfectly okay. If you didn't hit this target, it's the very first one you did. It doesn't mean you can't do this, but that comes with practice and following a structure. But there's quite a bit of corroborating ideas in the chat. One of the things, we could rule out a lot of things, I think, just based on what's in the chat. But I'll let you guys, I won't front load you, and I'll let you guys make up your own decision on whether or not that exists. But here is your feedback photo of where you guys were sent. I thought the 5 peaks thing was kind of interesting. I think it was Jacob who got that. 5 peaks or tops. Are there 5 there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I could kind of see that. So the idea of it being an earthen environment, of having a lot of peaks, having a lot of trees, the water there as well, all of those things are exactly what's at the site. Now there's some outlier data, which is to be expected, which is fine. So if you didn't get those exactly, it's probably likely due to simply the maybe mental noise going on, or just need to practice, or it's the first time, what happens. It's not a big deal, but there's quite a bit of people who did get pretty specific information about this photo. And this photo could have been anything. I could have taken a photo, at the bottom of the ocean to, the inside of a glove compartment. But I think that I thought I'd pick this one for you guys to see if there was something similar. And don't worry if you didn't get something similar to this. Again, it's the way that you practice this, in the way that you get better, is not by being immediately good at it right away. The way that that's your picture. It's the way you do it is by repeating a structured technique again and again, and not straying from that structured technique. That's what gets you the results. When I first started, I had a kind of thing. What happened with me is, for the first 3 sessions I ran, or actually they blew my mind. I didn't expect it. For about a month after that, every single practice target I did was horrible. It was you could throw a rock at the earth and miss based on how close my data was to the actual feedback target. So it's okay. It's if you don't hit it, and this is one of the things I think when remote viewing, it's important to create, is that in a learning environment, I think it's important to create one where it's okay to fail, because the process itself, what you're responsible for as the remote viewer, is staying within the structure. Did you produce the line squiggle, the handshake correctly at the beginning? Did you do that right? Did you listen and thought catch the different perceptions that were coming in through the categories correctly? Or did your mind wander to other areas? Did imagination come in there? Did you listen to your intuition on where the drawing should go? And that's what you're in control of, is the structure. The actual information that's coming in through the structure actually is completely outside of your realm of really responsibility, because you're not the one who's responsible for the spontaneous ideas or perceptions that come in. That's actually the responsibility of the unconscious mind, which, that's a whole other lecture and theory about how that works. And, it's a different topic for another night, perhaps. But it's what's important for you to know is that if you didn't hit this exactly, it's okay. But a lot of people did. And, everyone has this capability. But with the practice of it, you can develop this into something that is a very high fidelity information gathering tool, where it's more than just describing the textures of an environment or some basic shapes. That, well, I can tell you I'm in a fairly natural place. There's some water there and there's some textures, and that's it. It's no, you can actually take the skill with practice all the way to a level where you're describing the purposes of activity. You're describing what's going on inside of structures, when you're describing what the agenda is of certain, you can do all these different types of unique movements to get a lot of detailed information about whatever it is that you're looking at. But one of the things that you may have run into, and I'm just going to briefly mention this here at the end, is that you may have run into, even when I was talking and doing the experience, that there was mental noise that was jumping in. You may have had noise come through those avenues, through the visual, through the auditory, through the kinesthetic, that what happens when the noise comes in is it makes it so you're unable to accurately perceive the correct information that your unconscious is trying to spontaneously arise up for you to grab. And this can come in ways of memories. Maybe you remembered something from earlier in the day. Yeah, an outside stimulation. Maybe your phone or a door slam or something like that. That could take your attention off of it. Maybe suggestions, like someone's, hey, I think this is the target someone's going to give you. That can happen. Guesses, imagination, all that type of stuff can get in the way of intuitive information, of intuitive thoughts. And so while there's certainly not enough time to really go over how to deal with that in this particular webinar, the structured technique deals with this key aspect because it's the number one hurdle that, okay, it's great when you start hitting targets, but you want to increase your level of accuracy. And to do that, you have to overcome mental noise. So the next step to just getting your feet wet, what is this remote viewing thing? And how do I use my perception? This is what's next, is dealing with mental noise, understanding the next steps on the, you only did the very first part of the remote viewing session. What are the next stages to then get higher level data through? But this is, maybe you guys experience some of this come through when you're running a very short basic exercise. But I just want to give you two brief examples of what session data can look like. And so, I mean, if you've seen my webinars, you know what those look like as far as project details. But I'm not really showing what those who are hitting photographs, what that session data looks like, as far as literally one-to-one matches that can occur. So this was a photo. I mean, I ran this a long time ago. I think like in 2014 is when I ran this one. But we run calibration targets every once in a while to see where our accuracy is. And if I'm going to hire a remote viewer or I'm doing consulting work for somebody else, I need to make sure that my skill level is in peak operating condition. And if my accuracy is not to this level of a degree that you see here, I would not ever feel confident in ever charging someone money for a project, nor would, if I'm hiring a remote viewer to do work for me, I would need it to be this level to feel confident that I could then pass on those results to somebody else. But this is what's possible. So as you can see, just from the diagrammatic sketches between the dragonfly over there and the diagrammatic sketch up here, it's very, very close diagrammatically. And the thing about remote viewing is it's very much a describing something through the different paths of perception without naming it directly oftentimes. So in this one, the name actually never was here. I never said dragonfly in this calibration target, but I did get that there are transparent membranes on this thing, that there's a stem that's resting below it, and the thing is kind of it's going upwards. I described kind of almost like an emotional aesthetic of the site too, this natural beauty. It looks ornamental. It's placed here, like it's been placed here. I mean, maybe that's not even that dragonfly's not even alive. Maybe that's something that the photographer put on there to take the photo. But it's describing, so we have a whole lot of detailed information about what is there at the site. And this is the type, this is what you practice until you get to this level. And then you can start using it to look, then, well, what do you want to look at? Do you want to look at the pyramids? Do you want to look at the moon? Do you want to look at, optimum health trajectory for you and loved ones? Do you want to look at investments? All sorts of stuff. But this is where you can get. So here's another example of, this was one with a friend of mine. He was also a professional viewer. He lost his keys when he was on vacation, and he remote viewed where they were. And so again, this is the practical application of the skill. And so where they were was actually right underneath in the bottom of the stick shift of his vehicle. They had fallen right down in there. And so when he reached, apparently there was like an open in the mesh where the key had gone down in. And so he did the session, he drew that. I know what that is. It's mechanical gears. He described the thing moving. And so that looks like a stick shift. So he went and looked and found the keys. And so it's another example, practical application of the skill and kind of the one-to-one nature that you can achieve. But anyway, this is where you can take the skill. And, as far as where this is going, and if anyone is interested in kind of moving forward with this and what I'm doing, I am very, very excited. I was on Project Camelot with Carrie Cassidy. It's also on my website and a number of other my social media places. But, one of the purposes of the webinar was also to get people a little bit excited about what's coming up in the future for me and what I'm doing. And what I'm doing is next month, at the end on March 25th, I'm launching an online classroom to learn fundamentals of remote viewing. So if you're new to this, or even if you're advanced, but you kind of want to learn with a new perspective and a new technique, I'm beginning a new online course with a collection of all the information that I've learned, and I'm boiling it down into high definition streaming video content with an online community aspect of it to it as well. And so the first course that I'll be teaching, and there's a bunch of people that have already signed up for this as well, but the first class that is going to be released on March 25th is going to be the remote viewing fundamentals. But in the class, what you'll learn is a little bit beyond the basics for tonight, but you'll learn remote viewing theory and a lot more of the theory and the history behind how remote viewing works and why it's set up in the way it does and what we think the implications of how human consciousness works in relationship to remote viewing and non-local intuition. So you'll get the backstory of that. I'll talk a bit about in the video course how to clear signal line of mental noise. This is one of the things that we talked about at the very end. Perhaps one of the reasons you might have missed is because there may have been mental noise or imagination was in there. That, like, if it was the city, for example, that could have been that you had a clear flash or a clear picture of a cityscape, and that unless you had a way, I didn't teach you that in this course because there's simply not enough time. But there's ways to handle that, and you discharge that information. And it's a kind of thing that once you actually learn that modality of discharging mental noise, it's actually applicable in more than just remote viewing. And so I talk a little bit about that and some of the implications of discharging mental noise and even using that in other aspects of your life. I talk a bit about connecting with non-local sites. Again, it's the handshaking stuff that we talked very briefly tonight, getting descriptions and diagrammatic drawings, as well as I go a lot more detail and in-depth on thought catching. So all the way to the beginning to the end of completing a full session and then practicing that work. Because before you could do anything crazy, I say crazy, right? Do pyramids or whatever it is, you need to be able to hit photographs. So this is the course that is about buttoning down and the hatches and about making sure your fundamentals are in pristine operating condition. And then from there, later on in the future, I'll be releasing more advanced stuff to where if you want to learn the more advanced skill sets, if you want to learn project management, putting it together and doing all that stuff, that's kind of what comes next. But a couple other just perks that come along with the course is for enrolled students, I do Q&A sessions regularly as well. So it's just anything that students want to come in, whether it's their work, whether it's an overview of what they've done. There's Q&As that go along with it as well. There's downloadable worksheets and tools. And there's something that I'm really excited about because it's something that no other online course perhaps in some other psychic communities may use this, but I know in remote viewing there's nothing like this that exists out there right now because I'm very familiar with kind of what's available. But I'm putting together a private Slack community, and I'll show an example of this in 1 second, where individuals who are enrolled in the class, they'll be able to speak with the other students with direct messaging, with a group chat, and I'll always be on. I may not always get instantaneous response, but you'll be able to ask me questions there. And then so it'll be basically an active community of discussion, which I think using something like Slack, which I've used in the professional environment in Silicon Valley, it's what we use to communicate across company-wide, and it's the best way. And so I'm creating that for these courses so that we can have the same kind of interaction between the students, the same kind of joint learning, as opposed to a lot of other remote viewing courses out there and just instruction is very solitary, or you have to dump thousands of dollars on one-on-one instruction or the training workshops. So it's a lot more, it's price prohibitive. So, but I think this is something I'm really excited about because I'm pretty passionate about teaching it, finding other people that are interested in learning it, and then also seeing other people progress in their skill level too. Also have other perks allowed. I do on top of this, after the fact of the class, if there'll be opportunity for one-on-one instruction on top if you want more personalized instruction. And then you'll also get early access as soon as you purchase one of the classes, the first one, which is coming out on March 25th. You'll have early access to the new classes before they launch. And so upcoming ones is the second class I'll be releasing is going to be on extended remote viewing and developing your inner sight. And so that's going to be more of an experiential form of remote viewing, where this comes from a lot of my work in lucid dreaming and astral projection. And then taking what I learned through that, there's another type of remote viewing that's much more structured methodology, where you go into an altered state of consciousness and you're able to experience the sight. But a lot of what you learn in class 1 applies directly to class 2. And so it's not a requirement. Maybe some of my much more advanced classes later on will have prereqs, but that'll be the next one that comes out. Maybe, I'm not sure the exact timelines, but at least a few months later after class 1. The next class after that, class 3, which is on the planning board, is Psychic Self-Defense and Exploring the Matrix Responsibly. This is something I talked about with Carrie on Project Camelot. I've talked about this on other radio shows, and where it's about, one, it's, remote viewing can be like fire. You put it in the hands of someone who's not ready for those advanced skill sets yet, they're going to burn themselves. And I think that understanding how to protect yourself against energetics, environment, as well as things that are going on internally, and there's a lot that can be done there to protect an individual before they, say, stick their head into the void and see what's on the other side. You stick with photographs first, which are pretty harmless, but you go from there. Anyway, yeah, I'll go back to that slide, but I do, if you are interested in signing up, before you guys go, there is an early bird price right now, and it'll be there until the end of the month. It's going to be shifting to the full price on March 1st. But there's an early bird price right now for $129.95 for the course. To sign up, the release is on March 25th. And I'm also actually, for early birds only, and until the 1st, I'm going to include my book 2 with those who sign up right away. There's been quite a few signups already, so there's a bunch of people who have already shown interest and they're ready to start on the 25th. So there's already a lot of other students that if you decide to join, you'd be able to progress along with it. But as an incentive to help me out and kind of support the program, I am offering the discounted price till the 1st for $129. It's otherwise $150, and I'm throwing in my book for free, which is normally a $20 value. So anyway, that's it for the course. If it interests you, think about it. Check out my website, which is Technical Intuition. And if you want to learn really more about remote viewing, I'm really excited to kind of get this off the ground and begin working with those and creating a community around those who want to take it to the next level. And so, the one thing I did want to show, just one slide. If you have never seen Slack, the Slack community, this is what it looks like. But there's a lot of different channels that are just discussion channels, chat channels. You have a little profile, so you can talk with other students in this. And it's all real time as well. But the cool part about it is you can upload your session works, your session scans, for other people to take a look at and critique on those session scans. So this is the type of environment I want it to be real time. I want it to be where there's a lot of constructive criticism, because I know it helped me. That's one of the things that really helped me when I began this process, is getting those critiques, is getting that feedback. And it's doing it in a way that, when I learned from the personnel from the Stargate program, I spent thousands of dollars on one-on-one instruction. But in this kind of environment, it's a lot more accessible, I think, to a lot more people. So that's what's coming up. If it interests you, please check out my website, and I'd be more than thrilled to work with you on the March 25th.